Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today I'm going to discuss with you a country that is very interesting to many people. It's been one of the most popular places to move over the last few years, in part due to the freedom, in part due to the extreme diversity, lots of things to do. It offers lots, great weather, pretty easy to relocate to. In fact, we help people get residency there, permanent residency actually, that never needs to be renewed within about 3 weeks, which is Mexico. So I'm specifically going to talk to you today about how Mexican taxes work. I have spoken about this in generalities previously, and one of the things that I find frequently is I run around having to bust myths from all kinds of people, including, sadly, actual accountants who are giving people bad advice in that country. And so this one in particular, I've heard a few times people get some bad advice about how things work in Mexico. I'm going to give you the on-the-ground reality of how things work and what you can expect, and actually how the laws work and how people misunderstand the laws and how you should be aware of that so you don't get stuck. So let's dive in and discuss it. Before we do, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notification bell. We appreciate your support. Thank you very much for being here on the channel. Please, if you would like help with relocating abroad, getting residency, citizenship, setting up your company in another country, setting up yourself in another country, paying the lowest legal amount of tax possible, please reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below, or send a message through offshorecitizen.net. Okay, so Mexico is what I refer to as a country that does not have low tax, but nobody pays them anyway. And this is sort of an interesting contrast between what is true on the ground and what is true in law. And I find it especially interesting when we have clients going from places like Germany, Sweden, etc., who are very much used to staying on the following the letter of the law in their country. And when things are blurred, when things are not that way, when they're not so organized, when they're not so clean, they're like, ooh, this is abnormal to me. And that makes sense, right? If you're coming from Germany, I mean, they're sticklers and they are on top of it and enforcing. I did a video a little while ago about the worst tax systems on the planet, top 5, and you can go and check it out if you're interested. But Mexico is not like that, okay? Unfortunately, what this means is that because people very frequently get away with certain things, they believe that things are a way that they're not, okay? So, totally true. If you go to Mexico and you start talking to expats, what you will hear frequently is, I've lived here for 7 years and I've just never filed taxes. I've never had problems, I've never had issues. This is the fact in Mexico. People will do this, they will get away with it, they will have no issues, the tax departments do not bother them, the government does not come to them. They seem to more or less ignore expats, people at least who are not citizens. Maybe it's because of the fact that they realize that they're getting tourist dollars, they want to attract that, etc. Maybe they've got bigger problems with cartels, or they just are disorganized and having a hard time going after their own people. Whatever the reason, the truth is, on the ground, it's probably one of the top countries for people simply not filing and paying tax. And okay, that's just the reality of what happens, okay? On the other hand, what I hear a lot of people say, and I've heard actually tax accountants in Mexico say this, is, oh, if you're a temporary resident, you don't need to pay tax, okay? And where this misnomer comes from is if you read the Mexican tax rules and you pay attention to the subject of tax residency, there are some nuances that get thrown off here, okay? So what happens in Mexico is, to the extent that you establish a home in Mexico, you can become tax resident, okay? So you can actually spend quite a decent amount of time there, not be tax resident. You can be in a situation where, they're pretty lenient on a bunch of these things. But if you're establishing your home, if that is your actual home, right? Then they're gonna say, all right, well, what about, do you have another home somewhere else? And they're going to look at your center of vital interest, and they'll say, where is your center of vital interest? That's gonna be the place that you're a tax resident. So yes, true. If you have another home somewhere else and that other place is your center of vital interests, then you could avoid being tax resident in Mexico. The problem for a lot of these people is that is simply not the reality for them. They are actually trying to get out of their home country, so they've severed ties there. They've eliminated their center of vital interests from that place, and they've relocated down to Mexico. Mexico is their home. If you were to examine it, it is their home. And some people will say, oh, well, your income's from outside of Mexico, you're, not employed by a Mexican company, you're et cetera, et cetera. The truth is, Mexican tax residents are taxable on their worldwide income, period. That's just the way that it goes. And if your home is Mexico and you're spending over half the year in Mexico, then you're going to be liable for Mexican tax rules, okay? Now, again, reality on the ground, nobody's going to enforce this. Nobody's going to come to you. If you don't ever file a tax return, you're probably never going to hear from anyone. People live for a decade or more there, never have any issues. So, compared with some places where they're going to be all on top of you, Mexico is not that place. However, let's not confuse what the law is with what people get away with, okay? And by the way, might continue to get away with for decades because Mexico is Mexico. A lot of these countries are like that. Their enforcement is just not high. In addition to this, Mexico does have international tax rules. So there is effects onto their global assets. Okay, so it's not like you can say, oh, I have global assets, I'm just not going to pay taxes, etc. Again, you can get away with that perfectly well. You can have a foreign company and the foreign company can pay you and you can just pay on a company card and things like this. You'll probably never hear from anybody. What I do recommend to people is certainly for safety reasons, totally independent of tax, I would not typically use Mexican residency if I'm actually living in Mexico as my place of residence for the purposes of banking, etc. I would have another residence and I would use that simply, okay, that creates a dispute from a treaty perspective, etc. And so, maybe that works well for you under the law in Mexico. But aside from that potential advantage, you're in a situation where you can not have your information reported to Mexico. And why is that important? Because there's a potential risk, right? Information inside the Mexican government is not private, okay? Cartels can get access to it, can become a kidnapping risk. If you're seen to have tens of millions of dollars or something, and you're living in Tulum, somebody can find out about that. So I recommend not creating that tie to Mexico. Are there ways to optimize your global tax in Mexico legally? Yeah, there are. You certainly can do things with foreign structures, again, provided that you actually have foreign substance and things like this. That's certainly possible. And a bunch of people do it. Like I said, because Mexico is Mexico, in reality, most people just get away with being very lenient. But it is possible to set up certain types of structures. Those structures actually are alarmingly complicated compared to some countries. It's actually harder than many sort of developed countries to fall in just because a few of the Mexican rules are pretty all-encompassing. But that being said, it is possible. If you earn the income personally, it will be taxable, but if you keep it into a foreign structure, you can take advantage of that. And so, yeah, that is the reality of taxes in Mexico. And you can choose to do with it as you will. If you would like help relocating to Mexico, like I said, we help people with that. We help people who don't want to relocate to Mexico, but who want to get permanent residency, so they have that as a backup plan in the future. It's beautiful because you get it once, it's good for the rest of your life. Awesome. It also starts the clock ticking towards citizenship. And so, you could get to the point where you can activate that option if you want to. And so, yeah, it's pretty attractive for the right people. Anyway, I hope it helps. If you have questions, put them in the comments below, and I will look forward to seeing you on the next video.